A fugitive marked by war collapsed at the edge of a hidden valley, home to a woman cast out by her silence a shield against a world that had only hurt her. Elias, if he still answered to a name, knew only the burning in his lungs and the relentless phantom sounds of gunfire that chased him through the skeletal forests. Each ragged breath was a betrayal, a refusal to surrender to the blackness that licked at the edges of his vision. The world had become a smear of grey rock and thorny scrub, indifferent to the blood he left upon it, a grim map of his retreat from a life he no longer claimed. His pursuers, men carved from the same stone of conflict that had shaped him, were relentless, their dogs baying in the distance, a sound that echoed the howls of his own internal torment. He carried nothing but the weight of memories, each one a shard of glass in his soul, and a festering wound in his side that throbbed with a venomous heat. Then, the ground beneath him simply vanished. He tumbled, not into an abyss, but down a steep, hidden incline, through a curtain of thick, ancient ivy that tore at his remaining strength, finally spilling onto soft, loamy earth. For a moment, the world was silent, save for the frantic hammering of his own heart. When he could force his eyes open, it was to a place that felt like a dream, a whispered secret of the earth. Sunlight, filtered through a canopy of colossal trees he did not recognize, dappled a valley floor impossibly green, a riot of unfamiliar blossoms scenting the air with a perfume of forgotten peace. A crystalline stream whispered nearby, its song a stark contrast to the violence he had fled. He tried to rise, to understand, but his body was a traitor, his limbs leaden. It was then he saw her. She stood at the edge of the tree line, as still and silent as the ancient stones that dotted the valley. Lyra. Her name was a whisper in the valley, unheard by the very people who had cast her to its fringes. She was not of the small, fearful enclave nestled deeper within this green fold of the world, a people who had long ago turned their backs on the scarring touch of the outer lands, but she was born of them, and then, by them, exiled for a silence they mistook for defiance, for a way of seeing they called unholy. Her eyes, the color of moss after rain, regarded him not with fear, nor with pity, but with a profound, unsettling understanding. She was slight, wrapped in simple, earth-toned fibers, her dark hair unbound, falling like a wild stream. In her hand, she clutched a bundle of herbs, their fragrance sharp and clean. The distant shouts of the village elders, should they discover him, would mean his end, and perhaps hers too for not raising an alarm. Yet, she did not call out. Elias saw the flicker of some internal debate in the depths of her gaze, a shadow of shared pain. He was a wound upon this pristine land, a harbinger of the very chaos her people had sought to escape. He expected her to flee, to alert the others. Instead, after a long, drawn-out moment where the only sound was the thrum of unseen insects and his own gasping breath, she moved. Slowly, deliberately, she approached, her bare feet making no sound on the forest floor. She knelt beside him, her presence a strange solace. Without a word, she laid a cool hand on his fevered brow, then her gaze traveled to the seeping wound in his side. He saw not revulsion, but a flicker of grim recognition. With a resolve that belied her slender frame, she made her choice, a choice against her own safety, against the rigid laws of her isolated kin. She would not leave him to the wolves, neither the four-legged kind nor the two-legged ones that hunted him. Her world was already one of solitude, his presence would merely deepen its shadows, or perhaps, improbably, share its fragile light. Elias drifted in and out of consciousness, a fragmented tapestry of pain, fevered dreams, and fleeting moments of lucidity. Each time he surfaced, Lyra was there, a silent sentinel in the dim light of the crude shelter she had managed to drag him to, a shallow cave, almost a scar in the hillside, hidden behind a curtain of weeping willows and tangled vines, a place evidently her own solitary domain. The air within was cool and smelled of damp earth, crushed herbs, and the faint, smoky scent that clung to her. She moved with an economy of motion, her hands, though slender, surprisingly strong and deft as she cleaned and dressed his wound with poultices of mashed leaves and bound it with strips of what looked like softened bark. She coaxed sips of bitter, cleansing tea between his cracked lips, her touch impersonal yet profoundly gentle. He learned the rhythm of her days through the sounds and smells that permeated his hazy awareness, the soft scrape of a stone pestle grinding herbs, the rustle of her movements as she tended a tiny, smokeless fire, the distant calls of birds she seemed to understand. Communication was a language of breath and shadow. He had no words, and she offered none. Her face, often in profile as she worked, was a study in stoic endurance, yet he began to see the subtle map of past sorrows etched around her eyes, the proud set of her jaw that spoke of unbroken resilience. His world, once a sprawling battlefield of survival, had shrunk to this small, shared space, governed by her quiet competence. He observed her as a man marooned might watch the tide, learning its patterns, its power, its subtle shifts. She foraged for food, strange, sweet roots, tart berries, edible fungi he'd never seen, sharing her meager portions without expectation. As his strength slowly, painstakingly returned, a profound sense of indebtedness settled within him, deeper than the marrow of his bones. It wasn't just for his life, but for the unexpected reprieve from the relentless cacophony of his past. Here, in the heart of her enforced solitude, a different kind of quiet began to take root in him, pushing back, however tentatively, against the echoes of war. He would watch her hands, capable and sure, whether weaving a snare from plant fibers or coaxing a spark from flint and tinder. There was a deep, instinctual wisdom in her connection to this hidden valley, a harmony he, a man of discord, could only marvel at. His initial gratitude, raw and desperate, began to transform. It deepened into respect for her resilience, for the unyielding spirit that allowed her to exist, even thrive, in such isolation, cast out yet unbroken. Then, a slow-burning curiosity kindled. Who was this woman who moved like a spirit of the wild, whose silence held more weight than any sermon, whose eyes reflected a sorrow that mirrored his own, yet held a spark of something untamed and pure? The unspoken agreement was forged in those shared silences, in the ministering of her hands, in his passive acceptance of her care, and in the growing awareness that in this forgotten corner of the world, two broken souls had found a fragile, unarticulated sanctuary. He began to mend, not just his body, but something deeper, something he had thought long dead. The rains came with the turning of the season, a relentless, weeping grey that transformed the hidden valley into a shimmering, waterlogged canvas. The stream swelled to a muddy torrent, its gentle whisper becoming a low growl. It was during one such downpour, when the wind howled like a mournful beast through the trees and the roof of Lyra's cave shelter began to weep in earnest, that the first true crack appeared in the wall of silence between them. A section of the packed earth and stone supporting a crude overhang near the entrance, weakened by days of relentless soaking, gave way with a sudden, sickening groan. Elias, now strong enough to move with purpose, reacted purely on instinct honed by years of imminent threat. He threw himself towards Lyra, who was crouched near the small fire, trying to shield its embers, and pulled her back just as a cascade of mud and rocks thundered down where she had been moments before. They landed in a heap, his arms around her, the cold shock of the near miss vibrating through them both. For a breathless moment, they remained entangled, the roar of the collapsing earth outside and the frantic beat of their hearts the only sounds. He felt the unexpected fragility of her beneath his grip, the sharp bones of her shoulders. When he finally loosened his hold, their eyes met, and in that shared glance, something shifted. The carefully constructed barriers of stoicism and silence trembled. Later, as they worked together in the dim, smoky light, clearing the debris and shoring up the weakened wall with fallen branches he dragged in, the quiet was different. It was no longer a void, but a space filled with unspoken awareness. That evening, huddled near the sputtering fire, wrapped in whatever dry coverings they possessed, Lyra spoke. Her voice, when it finally came, was low and raspy from disuse, like the rustle of dry leaves, yet it held a surprising clarity. She did not look at him, but stared into the flames, her profile etched by their flickering light. "They called me Kestrel-eyed," she began, the words falling softly into the charged air. "Because I saw things. Not visions. Just the way the wind would turn before a storm. The sickness in a plant before it withered. The fear in a deer before the hunter even drew his bow." She paused, tracing a pattern on the cave floor with a fingertip. "My mother understood. She had a touch of it. But after she left, the elders feared it. Said it was unnatural." Another pause, longer this time, filled with the ghosts of old hurts. "They said my silence was a judgment. That I communed with shadows." A small, bitter sound escaped her, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. "When the blight came to the lower fields, and I warned them, they said I had cursed it. When the fever took old man Hemlock, and I had seen the shadow on him days before. They said I willed it. She finally turned her head, her moss-green eyes finding his in the gloom. It is easier to be an outcast by their decree than a curse amongst them. Elias listened, his own scars aching in sympathy. He understood the brand of otherness, the fear of the unknown that could curdle into cruelty. He said nothing, but his gaze conveyed a depth of understanding that words would have diluted. Her story, a small, broken piece of her life offered in the dim light, deepened his protective instinct into something fiercely personal. He now knew the shape of some of her wounds. And as this fragile intimacy bloomed, the outside world, or at least Lyra's small, isolated corner of it, began to stir. The elders of the hidden enclave, a council of stern-faced men and women who clung to their traditions like life rafts in a stormy sea, had grown increasingly uneasy. Whispers, like insidious vines, began to creep from the cluster of huts in the valley's heart towards Lyra's secluded dwelling. They had tolerated the outcast woman in their midst, a necessary blemish on their pristine isolation, but the presence of an outsider, a man, and a wounded one at that, was an intolerable disruption to their carefully maintained equilibrium. He was a variable they could not control, a potential seed of the chaos they had fled. Their disapproval, once a passive shunning of Lyra, now sharpened, focusing its edge on the stranger she harbored. The pressure from the enclave intensified, evolving from furtive glances and hushed condemnations to more overt acts of hostility. One morning, Lyra returned from her foraging, her face pale, her usual composure fractured. The small patch of medicinal herbs she carefully cultivated near the stream had been trampled, the rare root she nurtured for winter meticulously uprooted and scattered. No words were spoken, but the message was clear, a deliberate, cruel starving of her resources. Elias felt a cold fury rise within him, a familiar echo of the righteous anger that had once fueled him in battle, now repurposed to defend this quiet, resilient woman. He began to accompany her, his presence a silent deterrent, his gaze sweeping the tree lines, a warrior's instinct reawakened. The elders, emboldened by their perceived righteousness, finally decided on direct confrontation. Led by a stern, white-haired man named Malachi, who carried the weight of his community's fear like a ceremonial cloak, a small delegation approached Lyra's cave. They found her outside, mending a fishing net, with Elias standing a little apart, his stance relaxed yet watchful, like a wolf guarding its den. Malachi's voice was heavy with authority, addressing Lyra, but his eyes frequently darting towards Elias. "The woman Lyra," he intoned, "you have defied the council. You have harbored this outsider. He is a blight, a danger to our peace." One of the other men, younger and more aggressive, spat on the ground. "He brings the taint of the warring lands. He must leave. And you, for your continued defiance, will face further judgment." Lyra stood, her small frame unbowed, her silence her shield. But before she could even form a response, or perhaps choose not to, Elias stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of her. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it resonated with a quiet power that made the wind itself seem to pause. "She has done nothing," he stated, his words simple, direct, each one a carefully aimed stone. "This woman," he gestured towards Lyra, his hand surprisingly gentle as it grazed her arm, "found me broken. Dying. She showed me kindness when your laws would have left me for carrion." His eyes, chips of glacial ice, met Malachi's. "You speak of peace, yet you trample her medicines. You speak of community, yet you cast out one who sees more clearly than any of you." He took another step, and the delegation instinctively recoiled. "Her silence," he continued, his voice dropping slightly, drawing them in, "is not defiance. It is the wisdom of one who has listened to the heart of this valley while you were deafened by your own fears. Her otherness is a gift you were too blind to recognize. She is more a part of this land, more attuned to its truths, than all of you combined." He paused, his gaze sweeping over their stunned faces. "If he is a blight," Elias declared, his voice ringing with conviction, "then I am that blight. Where she goes, I go. If you threaten her, you face me." There was no aggression in his tone, only an immutable statement of fact. The stand was made. Malachi and his followers, taken aback by his fierce defense and the unwavering solidarity between the two outcasts, could only gape. Their authority, so absolute within their enclosed world, had met an unyielding force. They retreated, muttering threats and dark prophecies, but the immediate confrontation was over. In their wake, a new understanding settled between Elias and Lyra. His words had been more than a defense, they were an affirmation, a public binding of his fate to hers. The dynamic had shifted subtly, from protector and protected to true partners, facing the storm together. But the storm was far from over. As if summoned by the rising tension, a different, far more dangerous threat began to materialize. Faint at first, then growing more distinct on the wind, the distant baying of hounds, the unmistakable metallic ring of men armed for war. Elias's past, the one he had run so hard and so far from, was catching up. The soldiers, or perhaps bounty hunters eager for the price on a deserter's head, had found his trail. The hidden valley, their fragile sanctuary, was about to become a battleground. The idyllic peace of the valley shattered like fragile glass. The sounds Elias had sought to escape, the harsh shouts of men, the clang of steel, the chilling howls of trained hunting dogs, echoed from the valley entrance, growing closer with terrifying speed. Panic erupted within the small enclave, their carefully constructed isolation proving to be a flimsy defense against determined aggression. Villagers scattered, their earlier bravado dissolving into primal fear. Elias and Lyra stood at the mouth of her cave, the grim reality setting in. There was no time to flee the valley itself, the entrance was already compromised. "They're not just passing through," Elias said, his voice taut, his eyes scanning the terrain, already mapping out defensive positions, his mind slipping back into the grim calculus of survival. Lyra, her face pale but resolute, nodded. Her unique perception, usually attuned to the subtle shifts of nature, now vibrated with the raw, brutal energy of the invaders. She pointed towards a narrow, almost invisible game trail winding up the steep cliff face behind her cave. "There," she whispered, her voice urgent. "It leads to the Whispering Crags. Caves. Labyrinthine. They won't follow easily." It was a desperate gamble, but their only one. As the first armed figures appeared at the valley floor, spreading out with chilling efficiency, Elias and Lyra began their ascent. The climb was treacherous, demanding every ounce of their strength and agility. Elias, relying on his warrior's instincts, moved with a grim purpose, testing handholds, covering Lyra. But it was Lyra who truly navigated the ascent. Her bare feet found purchase on seemingly impossible ledges, her body moving with a fluid grace that spoke of an intimate, lifelong dialogue with these harsh rocks. She seemed to know every fissure, every hidden outcrop, as if the mountain itself guided her steps. The soldiers below spotted them, and a harsh cry went up, followed by the whistle of arrows, one thudding into the rock face perilously close to Lyra's head. Elias pushed her forward, shielding her with his own body as they scrambled higher. They reached a narrow fissure, barely wide enough to squeeze through, which opened into a network of shadowy, interconnected caves, the Whispering Crags Lyra had spoken of. The air inside was cold, damp, and alive with the eerie moan of wind funneling through unseen passages. Here, Lyra's gifts became their salvation. While Elias's skills were for open combat, this was a realm of shadows and echoes, of disorientation. But Lyra moved with an almost supernatural confidence. Her eyes, accustomed to the dim light of her cave and the subtleties of the forest, pierced the gloom. She could feel the subtle drafts, interpret the echoes, sense the dead ends before they reached them. "This way," she would murmur, her touch light on his arm, guiding him through passages that seemed to lead nowhere, past yawning chasms hidden in shadow. Several times, their pursuers, more reliant on sight and sound, blundered past their hiding places or became disoriented in the maze. Lyra, placing a hand against the cold stone, would tilt her head, listening not just with her ears, but with her whole being, predicting their movements, guiding Elias and herself deeper into the mountain's embrace. In one narrow passage, they were cornered. Two soldiers, hard-faced and relentless, blocked their path. Elias prepared for a desperate fight, but Lyra suddenly let out a piercing, high-pitched cry, a sound that mimicked a bird of prey he'd never heard, yet it resonated strangely with the acoustics of the cave. The sound, amplified and distorted by the rock, seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, disorienting their attackers just long enough for Elias to act, disarming one while Lyra, surprisingly agile, used the distraction to send the other sprawling with a well-aimed shove. They didn't kill, only disabled, then vanished deeper into the crags. Her intuition, her profound connection to this wild place, proved more critical than any weapon. As dusk bled into a starless night, they finally emerged onto a high, windswept ledge, the sounds of their pursuers lost far below in the labyrinth. They were battered, exhausted, but alive. Below them, the valley was dark, the fires of the invaders like angry eyes staring into the night. Lyra leaned against the rock, her breathing ragged but steady. Elias watched her, a new, profound respect dawning in his eyes. She had not just endured, she had led. She had saved them both. In the aftermath of their desperate flight, huddled together for warmth on the exposed ledge as a cold wind whipped around them, the raw adrenaline began to subside, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and a fragile sense of shared victory. The silence that fell between them was no longer one of mere observation or tentative understanding, but of profound, unspoken communion. Elias looked at Lyra, her profile illuminated by the faint starlight, her hair wild about her face, her clothes torn, yet her spirit radiating an unbroken strength. The words he needed to say felt too large, too clumsy for his tongue, accustomed more to commands and curses than to the delicate language of the heart. He reached into the worn leather pouch at his belt, the only possession he had carried with him from his former life, other than his wounds. From it, he pulled a small, smooth, grey stone, unremarkable to any but him. It was a stone he had picked up from the ruins of his childhood home, a tangible piece of a past he thought was entirely ash. He pressed it into her hand, his calloused fingers closing hers around it. "This," he began, his voice rough, thick with emotion he rarely allowed himself to feel, let alone express. "It is all I have of before. A stone. From a place of peace." Long ago he met her gaze, his own eyes, usually so guarded, now open and vulnerable. "My peace is with you now, Lyra. My place is where you are." It was not a grand declaration, but for Elias, it was everything. His past, his present, his hope for a future, all distilled into that simple offering, that quiet vow. Lyra looked from the stone to his face, her moss-green eyes glistening in the dim light. A slow, breathtakingly beautiful smile, the first true, unreserved smile he had ever seen from her, dawned on her lips. She did not speak, but her fingers tightened around the stone, her other hand coming up to gently touch his cheek, a gesture of profound acceptance and affection. In that touch, in that shared silence under the vast, indifferent stars, their bond was sealed, no longer just a partnership for survival, but a deep, reciprocal love. Months later, perhaps a full turn of the seasons, found them not in the whispering crags, nor in Lyra's old cave, but in a small, sheltered cove further up the hidden valley, a place even more secluded, accessible only by a winding path Lyra had known since childhood. They had built a small, sturdy cabin from fallen timber and smooth river stones, smoke curling lazily from its chimney, a testament to their shared labor and enduring hope. The scars of the invasion on the valley were slowly healing, as were their own. Elias had found a measure of peace he had never thought possible, the ghosts of war receding, replaced by the rhythm of seasons and the quiet strength of Lyra's presence. He worked the small plot of land they now cultivated, his hands, once instruments of war, now coaxing life from the rich earth. Lyra, no longer an outcast, had blossomed. She spoke more freely now, her voice losing its raspy edge, becoming melodious, often humming ancient, wordless tunes as she worked with her herbs, or tended the small flock of wild goats that had tentatively accepted their presence. The people of the enclave, humbled by the terror they had faced and by Elias's unexpected defense of their valley alongside Lyra's crucial guidance, kept their distance, but it was a distance now tinged with a grudging respect, even awe, particularly for Lyra. Some, the younger ones, occasionally left small offerings of seeds or woven cloth at the edge of their clearing, seeking her wisdom on planting, or her remedies for ailments, acknowledging the gifts they had once scorned. Their love was a quiet thing, woven into the fabric of their days, in shared glances over the fire, in the comfortable silence of their evenings, in the way their hands found each other as they walked the ancient paths. The valley, their sanctuary, thrived under their care, a testament to a love born in hardship, nurtured in silence, and destined to endure. In a world that so often misunderstands, that rushes to judge what it does not know, can we learn to listen to the silences? Can we find the courage to see the profound strength hidden within those who seem different, those who carry their wounds quietly? Their story whispers a truth across the ages, that true connection needs no grand pronouncements, that love can be a sanctuary built by two souls who dare to see beyond the surface, finding in each other a home. If their journey to find peace and belonging resonated with you, if your heart was touched by their quiet resilience, consider subscribing for more stories that explore the depths of the human spirit and the enduring power of acceptance.